Seattle did not simply rain, it wept. It was a weeping that seeped into the bones of the city, turning the concrete skyline into a blurred watercolor of slate gray and steel. For Ethan Cross, however, the rain was irrelevant. It was merely a variable in an equation. Precipitation meant traffic. Traffic meant a 14-minute delay in arrival times, and delays were inefficiencies that bled money. Ethan stood under the cantilevered glass awning of the generic high-rise medical center, checking his watch. It was a Patek Philippe, worth more than the average American's annual salary. Yet its face told him the only thing that money couldn't buy. Time was slipping away. At 34, Ethan was the architect of Cross-Stream Dynamics, a tech conglomerate specializing in predictive logistics. He had built an empire on a simple, terrifyingly effective philosophy. Remove the human element, and you remove the error. People were messy. People were unpredictable. Algorithms were safe. His life was a testament to this sterile perfection. His suit was a bespoke Italian cut, charcoal gray, sharp enough to cut glass. His shoes were polished to a mirror shine that reflected the gloomy sky. His heart, by all accounts that mattered in the boardroom, was just as polished and just as hard. He was currently outside Seattle Grace Hospital, not because he was ill, but because he was concluding a mandatory, court-ordered deposition regarding a patent dispute involving medical software. He hated hospitals. They smelled of antiseptic and desperate hope. Two things he had no use for. "Car is 2 minutes out, Mr. Cross," his assistant Marcus buzzed in his earpiece. "Make it 1, Ethan replied, his voice a smooth baritone that offered no room for negotiation. "I have the Omnicorp acquisition meeting at 4. If I'm late, the stock valuation shifts." He tapped the screen of his tablet, scrolling through the acquisition data. Omnicorp was a pharmaceutical giant. Buying them would diversify his portfolio, solidifying his legacy. It was a billion-dollar handshake waiting to happen. He was about to close the file when a force, small but surprisingly dense, slammed into his legs. The impact nearly knocked the tablet from his hand. Coffee, lukewarm and sugary, splashed across the front of his $3,000 trousers. Ethan froze. He looked down. Attached to his leg was a child. A girl, no older than 8, with hair the color of wet sand and a coat that was 2 sizes too big. She was trembling so violently that he could feel the vibrations through the wool of his suit. "Hey!" Ethan's voice was sharp, a reflex of annoyance. He instinctively reached down to peel her off, his fingers brushing against the sticky residue of spilled juice or soda on her sleeves. "Watch where you're going." The girl didn't let go. If anything, she tightened her grip, burying her face into the expensive fabric of his coat. She was sobbing, a raw, jagged sound that cut through the ambient noise of the city rain. "Please," she choked out. "Please, mister." Ethan looked around. Passers-by were glancing at them, then quickly looking away, adhering to the unspoken city code of non-interference. He looked at Marcus, who was stepping out of the revolving doors, looking horrified at the breach of his boss's personal space. "Kid, let go," Ethan said, firmer this time, though he didn't shove her. He simply stood there, stiff as a statue. The girl pulled back, tilting her head up. And that was when the air left Ethan's lungs. Her eyes were brown. Not just brown, but a deep, soulful mahogany flecked with gold, framed by lashes wet with tears. They were eyes that held a depth of terror that no 8-year-old should ever know. But it wasn't the fear that stopped Ethan. It was the familiarity. They were the same eyes he had seen in his nightmares for 10 years. The eyes of a woman he had loved, and a woman he had failed. "They're kicking her out," the girl gasped, snot running from her nose, mixing with the rain on her face. They said the money is gone. They're taking the tubes out. Please! You have to stop them. Ethan blinked, the cold logic of his brain stuttering. Who? Where are your parents? Mom and Dad are in heaven, the girl said, the words practiced, as if she had said them 1,000 times to social workers and teachers. It's just Rebecca. It's just my sister. She's sick. She's really sick. And the lady in the blue suit said she has to leave the bed because the insurance said no more. But she can't walk. She can't even stand up. The sleek black town car pulled up to the curb. The driver stepped out, holding an umbrella, ready to usher Ethan into the safety of leather seats and silence. The acquisition meeting, the billion-dollar deal, the future he had carefully constructed. Mr. Cross, the driver said, opening the door. Ethan looked at the car. Then he looked down at the girl. Her hands were red from the cold. She was holding on to him not as a person, but as a lifeline. A logical man, the man Ethan was famous for being, would hand the child $100 bill, tell the security guard to find a social worker, and get in the car. It wasn't his problem. The world was full of tragedies. He couldn't fix them all. Walk away, his mind screamed. Emotions are liabilities. But the girl tugged again. Please, just tell them to wait. Just 5 minutes. Ethan felt a phantom pain in his chest, an old wound tearing open. He looked at the driver. Wait here. Sir? Marcus interjected, tapping his watch. The Omnicorp board. I said wait, Ethan snapped, the command cracking like a whip. He looked down at the girl. What is your name? Maya, she whispered. Okay, Maya, Ethan said, the words feeling foreign on his tongue. He didn't offer his hand. That would be too intimate. But he gestured toward the revolving doors. Show me. Breathe. As he followed the small girl back into the sterile beast of the hospital, leaving the rain and his empire behind, Ethan Cross had no idea that he wasn't just walking into a building. He was walking into a demolition site that would tear down everything he thought he knew about power, wealth, and the value of a human soul. The transition from the cold, wet exterior of Seattle to the interior of the hospital was jarring. The air inside was recycled, dry, and heavy with the scent of rubbing alcohol, floor wax, and cafeteria coffee. It was a smell that Ethan associated with helplessness. Maya didn't run now. She walked with a frantic urgency, her sneakers squeaking on the linoleum. Ethan followed, his Italian leather shoes making a sharp, authoritative clack, clack, clack that drew eyes. He was an anomaly here, a shark in a tank of minnows. People in waiting rooms, slumped in plastic chairs with worn-out magazines, looked up at his tailored suit and the determined set of his jaw. They saw money. They saw power. But Ethan only saw the inefficiency of suffering. Maya led him past the reception, down a corridor marked Oncology, and toward the administrative station at the end of the hall. There was a commotion. 2 security guards stood by a nurse's station, their postures awkward, clearly uncomfortable with their current task. A woman in a navy blue blazer, the lady in the blue suit Maya had mentioned, was holding a clipboard, speaking to a nurse who looked like she was about to cry. And there, sitting in a wheelchair that looked too large for her, was a teenager. Ethan stopped 5 feet away, observing the scene with the detached precision of an auditor. The girl in the chair, Rebecca, looked to be about 17, though illness had stolen the bloom of youth from her cheeks. She was terrifyingly pale, her skin translucent enough to show the roadmap of blue veins beneath. She wore a beanie, but wisps of hair poking out suggested she was losing the battle to keep it. She was clutching a plastic bag containing a few clothes, her knuckles white. She wasn't crying. That was what struck Ethan the most. While Maya had been a fountain of tears, Rebecca was stone. Her jaw was set, her eyes, identical to Maya's, burning with a fierce, protective pride, even as her body slumped with exhaustion. "I understand, Ms. Patterson," the woman in the blue blazer was saying, her voice a practiced drone of bureaucratic empathy. "But the policy is clear. The coverage for the experimental inpatient therapy was capped at $50,000. You've exceeded that. The hospital needs the bed for acute cases. We've arranged for a transport to the state hospice facility." "I'm not going to a hospice to die," Rebecca said. Her voice was weak, raspy, but it carried a steel edge. "I just need the next round of chemo. The doctor said the tumor shrank. It's working. If you stop now, it comes back." "That is a clinical decision," the administrator said, avoiding Rebecca's eyes. "My department handles billing and occupancy. Without a payment method on file for the next cycle—" "I'll pay it," Rebecca said. "I'll get a job. I'll sign whatever loan you want." "Seat." The administrator sighed, a sound of impatience masked as pity. "You are a minor, technically, though emancipated. You have no credit history, no collateral, and, given your prognosis, no bank will underwrite that loan." "I'm sorry." She gestured to the security guards. "Please escort Miss Patterson to the transport vehicle." "No!" Maya screamed, darting past Ethan and throwing herself onto her sister's lap. "No! You can't take her!" Rebecca winced as Maya landed on her frail legs, but she wrapped her thin arms around the little girl immediately, shushing her. "Maya, stop. It's okay. We'll figure it out. Shh." The scene was a tableau of absolute systemic failure. It was the moment where the rules of society clashed with the laws of humanity. And humanity was losing. Ethan felt a surge of anger. Not the hot, fiery anger of passion, but the cold, calculating rage of a man who sees a machine that is broken. He hated broken things. He stepped forward. The movement was smooth and commanding. "Is there a problem here?" The administrator turned, startled. She looked Ethan up and down, her eyes widening as she recognized the quality of the suit, the watch, the sheer aura of authority. "Sir, this is a private matter," she said, though her voice wavered. "Are you a family member?" "I am an interested party," Ethan said. He didn't look at her. He looked at Rebecca. Rebecca looked back at him, confusion warring with defensiveness. She saw a rich man, likely arrogant, likely lost. "Maya," she whispered to her sister. "Who is this?" "I found him," Maya sniffled. "I told him." Ethan turned his gaze to the administrator. He stepped closer, invading her personal space just enough to establish dominance. "You mentioned a cap, a billing issue." "Yes, well," the administrator straightened her blazer. "Ms. Patterson's insurance has denied further claims. The hospital is a business, sir. We cannot operate on charity for long-term specialized care." "A business," Ethan repeated. He reached into his inner pocket. The security guards tensed, but he only withdrew a slim, black leather wallet. "I know a great deal about business, and I know that turning away a patient whose treatment is yielding positive results is not just bad ethics, it's a PR nightmare waiting to happen." He pulled out a card. It was made of black titanium, the Centurion card. It was a piece of metal that carried more weight than most laws. "How much?" Ethan asked. The administrator blinked. "Excuse me?" "The treatment," Ethan said, his voice dropping an octave, becoming dangerously quiet. "To keep her in this bed. To continue the protocol that is working." "How much?" It is extremely expensive, sir. The specialized oncology wing is $2,000 a day, plus the medication, which is proprietary. I didn't ask for an itemized list. I asked for a number. $50,000 to clear the arrears," she stammered, "and likely another $100,000 to cover the next 6 weeks of the cycle." $150,000. For Ethan, this was a rounding error. It was the cost of a company retreat. It was less than the bonus he paid his VP of operations. But for the girl in the wheelchair, It was the price of life. The disparity sickened him. He held out the black card between two fingers. "Swipe it." The hallway went silent. The nurses stopped typing. The security guards lowered their hands. Rebecca's eyes widened. She tried to sit up straighter, pain flashing across her face. "Wait. No. I don't know you." Ethan ignored her for a moment, keeping his eyes on the administrator. "Swipe the card, clear the balance, prepay for the next 3 months, and get her back in her room. Now." The administrator took the card with trembling fingers. I will need to get the billing terminal." "You have 2 minutes," Ethan said, "before I change my mind and buy this hospital just to fire you." It was a bluff, mostly. But she didn't know that. She scurried away. Ethan turned to Rebecca. He expected gratitude. He expected tears of relief. Instead, he found himself being scrutinized by a gaze that was sharp, intelligent, and deeply suspicious. Rebecca Patterson had learned the hard way that nothing in life was free. "Why?" she asked. Her voice was raspy, but the word hit him like a stone. Ethan looked at Maya, who was looking at him as if he were an angel. Then he looked at Rebecca, seeing the pride that kept her spine straight even as her body failed. "Consider it an investment," Ethan said flatly, buttoning his jacket. "I hate inefficiency. Wasting a life over a clerical error is inefficient." "I can't pay you back," Rebecca said, her chin lifting. "I don't have anything." Ethan looked at the worn-out sneakers on Maya's feet, the frayed cuffs of Rebecca's sleeves, and the sheer exhaustion radiating off them. "I didn't ask you to," Ethan replied. "I don't take charity," Rebecca insisted, though her voice cracked. Ethan stepped closer, lowering his voice so only she could hear. "It's not charity. It's a debt. And maybe one day, when you're not sitting in that chair, you'll pay it forward to someone else. But right now, your job isn't to negotiate. It's to stay alive for her." He nodded toward Maya. Rebecca looked down at her little sister, who was burying her face in Rebecca's blanket. The fight went out of Rebecca's shoulders. She closed her eyes, and a single tear escaped, tracking through the pale dust on her cheek. "Okay," she whispered. The administrator returned, breathless. "It's processed, sir. Ms. Patterson, we can return you to room 402 immediately." Ethan took his card back, sliding it into his pocket without looking at it. He checked his watch. He was now 20 minutes late. The board meeting had started. "Good," Ethan said. He turned to leave. "Wait," Maya called out. Ethan paused, but didn't turn around. "Goodbye, Maya." He walked away, the sound of his shoes echoing down the corridor. He walked fast, needing to put distance between himself and the vulnerability he had just witnessed. He needed to get back to the numbers. Numbers were safe. Numbers didn't have big brown eyes that reminded him of his dead fiancée. Numbers didn't make him feel. But as he exited the hospital and stepped back into the rain, Ethan Cross realized his hands were shaking. The boardroom of Cross-Stream Dynamics was a fortress of glass and mahogany, suspended 40 stories above the Seattle streets. The rain lashed against the floor-to-ceiling windows, but inside, the climate was controlled, the lighting perfect, and the atmosphere tense. Ethan walked in 30 minutes late. Conversation died instantly. 12 heads turned. The board members, men and women of immense power and wealth, looked at him with a mixture of annoyance and curiosity. Ethan Cross was never late. "Ethan," said Arthur Vance, the chairman of the board. He was a silver-haired man who smiled with his mouth, but never his eyes. "So kind of you to join us. We were just discussing the Omnicorp due diligence." Ethan took his seat at the head of the table. He didn't apologize. In his world, apologies were admissions of weakness. "My apologies are unnecessary," Ethan said, opening his laptop. "Let's proceed." "What is the status of the acquisition?" "We are in the final stages," said Sarah, the chief legal officer. The financials are solid. Omnicorp's stock has dipped slightly due to a few lawsuits, but that's standard for big pharma. Nothing that affects the bottom line. Their new oncology drug, Vitalis, is projected to capture 40% of the market next year. Oncology. The word triggered a flash in Ethan's mind. A pale girl in a wheelchair. A blue beanie. Lawsuits? Ethan asked, looking up from his screen. What kind of lawsuits? Arthur waved a dismissive hand. Nuisance suits. Wrongful death claims. Side effects. The usual ambulance chaser nonsense. They settle out of court for pennies. It's priced into the deal. Ethan stared at Arthur. Usually, he would nod and move on. He viewed lawsuits as a cost of doing business, just like electricity or rent. But today, the image of Rebecca Patterson refusing to go to a hospice wouldn't leave his head. They settle out of court for pennies. I want to see the case files, Ethan said. The room went quiet again. Ethan, Arthur said, a warning tone creeping into his voice. We are set to sign in 48 hours. The due diligence period is technically over. Reopening the files now would spook the shareholders. It looks like cold feet. It's not cold feet. It's thoroughness, Ethan lied. He didn't know what it was. It was a gut feeling, an itch he couldn't scratch. Send the files to my private server, all of them, even the settled ones. This is highly irregular, Sarah noted. I built this company on irregular, Ethan snapped, his patience fraying. Just do it. The meeting dragged on for another hour, a blur of EBITDA, synergistic alignments, and Q4 projections. Ethan operated on autopilot, giving the right answers, nodding at the right times, but his mind was elsewhere. When the meeting adjourned, Ethan retreated to his office, a cavernous space that felt more like a museum than a workspace. He poured himself a sparkling water and stood by the window, looking down at the city. Somewhere down there, in the maze of lights and rain, was a girl named Rebecca. He had bought her time, maybe 6 weeks, maybe 3 months. And then what? The money would run out again. The cancer would progress. He pulled his phone from his pocket. He hesitated, then dialed a number he rarely used. Dr. Eris, a voice answered. It was the private concierge doctor Ethan kept on retainer for his executives. Eris, it's Ethan Cross. Ethan. To what do I owe the pleasure? Are you ill? No. I need you to look into a case for me. Unofficially. Go on. A patient at Seattle Grace. Rebecca Patterson. 17 years old. Oncology ward. I want to know her status. Not the billing status, the medical status. Is she actually treatable? Or am I just dragging out the inevitable? There was a pause on the line. You're getting personally involved in a patient case. That doesn't sound like you, Ethan. I paid for her treatment, Ethan admitted, feeling foolish as he said it. I want to know if I wasted my money. I see, Eris said, his tone softening. Give me an hour. I'll pull her charts. Ethan hung up. He sat down at his desk, the massive screens glowing in the dim light. A notification popped up. Omnicorp legal files. Transfer complete. He clicked the folder. Thousands of documents. Dense legalese. Medical jargon. He should go home. He should eat the dinner his chef had prepared. He should sleep. Instead, Ethan opened the first file. He read. And as he read, a strange pattern began to emerge. It was subtle, buried in the footnotes of settlements and redacted non-disclosure agreements. It wasn't about Vitalis, the new wonder drug. It was about an older generic drug, a supportive medication used to boost immune systems during chemotherapy. A drug called Immunex. Several lawsuits claimed that specific batches of Immunex had been contaminated with a carcinogenic stabilizing agent during manufacturing to cut costs. The claimants alleged that the drug meant to help them fight cancer had actually accelerated it. Omnicorp had settled every single case, sealed the records, buried the data. Ethan leaned back in his chair, rubbing his temples. It was probably nothing. Just corporate cleanup. His phone buzzed. It was Dr. Aris. "Ethan? I'm here." "I looked at the girl's chart," Aris said, his voice grave. "It's complicated. She has acute lymphoblastic leukemia. Aggressive. But here's the strange thing. She was in remission 2 years ago. Standard protocol. She was doing fine. Then, about 18 months ago, she relapsed hard. Her body stopped responding to the standard chemo. And, Eris continued, looking at her history, the relapse coincided perfectly with a switch in her supportive medication. Her insurance mandated a generic brand to save money. Ethan's blood ran cold. He looked at the document on his screen. "Let me guess," Ethan whispered. "She was switched to Immunex?" There was the sound of typing on the other end. "Yes. How did you know?" Ethan didn't answer. He dropped the phone onto the desk. The glow of the screen illuminated his face, casting deep shadows under his eyes. He had just paid for Rebecca to be treated. But the company he was about to buy, the company that would make him a billionaire twice over, might be the reason she was dying in the first place. The walls of his office, usually a sanctuary of silence and power, suddenly felt very small. He stood up, grabbing his coat. He wasn't going home. "Marcus!" he shouted into the intercom. "Get the car." "Where to, sir?" "The hospital," Ethan said. "And call a tutor. The best one in the city for third-grade math." "Sir?" "Just do it, Marcus." Ethan Cross was done with algorithms. He was going to find out the truth, even if he had to tear it out of the world with his bare hands. The fluorescent lights of room 402 hummed with a low electrical buzz that usually drove Ethan crazy. In his office, silence was a commodity he paid thousands of dollars to maintain. Here, silence was impossible. There was the rhythmic whoosh-click of the infusion pump, the distant chatter of nurses in the hallway, and the scratching of a pencil against paper. Ethan sat on a hard plastic chair, his $3,000 jacket draped carefully over the back. He had loosened his tie, a rare concession to comfort. Across from him, sitting on the edge of the visitor cot, was Maya. Her tongue was poking out of the corner of her mouth in concentration. "I still don't get it," she groaned, dropping her pencil. "Why does the train have to leave Chicago at 4 p.m.? Who cares when it meets the other train?" Ethan picked up the worksheet. It was standard third-grade math. Distance equals rate times time. Simple. Linear. "It matters, Maya, because if the trains don't know where they are, they crash," Ethan said, his voice serious. "Or, in a business sense, you lose efficiency. Look here." He pulled out his gold fountain pen, flipping the paper over to the blank side. "Don't think of them as trains. Think of them as deliveries of ice cream." Maya's eyes lit up. "Chocolate?" "Sure. Chocolate. This train," he drew a straight, precise line, "is bringing chocolate to a store that runs out at 6 p.m. If the train is late, the customers leave. If the customers leave, the store loses money. If the store loses money, they can't buy more chocolate next week. The math isn't just numbers, Maya. It's prediction. It's seeing the future before it happens." Maya stared at the diagram, fascinated. "So math is like a superpower?" "In the right hands," Ethan nodded. "Yes." From the hospital bed, a weak laugh broke the lecture. Rebecca was awake. She had been watching them for the last 10 minutes, her head resting on a pillow that seemed to swallow her small frame. The color had returned slightly to her cheeks, thanks to the fluids and the reinstatement of her medication, but she still looked fragile, like a porcelain doll that had been dropped and glued back together. You're teaching an 8-year-old about supply chain logistics, Rebecca rasped, a small smile playing on her lips. She just needs to pass the 3rd grade, not run a Fortune 500 company. Ethan capped his pen, feeling strangely caught off guard. The principles are universal. Logic applies to everything. Does it? Rebecca shifted, wincing slightly as the IV line pulled. Is there logic in you being here? You paid the bill. You saved the day. Why come back to help with homework? It was the question Ethan had been dreading. Why was he here? He could have hired a tutor. He could have sent Marcus. But after reading the files about Omnicorp and Immunex, the idea of sitting alone in his penthouse, staring at the rain, had felt unbearable. He needed to see the victim of the crime he was investigating. He needed to remind himself that Case File 394 was a person. I promised, Ethan said simply. A contract is a contract. Rebecca studied him. Her eyes, intelligent and weary, seemed to strip away the layers of his wealth. You're a strange man, Mr. Cross. Ethan, he corrected. Mr. Cross is my father, and he's been dead for 20 years. Okay, Ethan. She paused. I'm Rebecca, but you knew that. I know a lot of things, Ethan said, standing up and walking to the window. The view was of a brick wall and an alleyway, a stark contrast to his panoramic city views. I know you were emancipated at 16. I know your parents died in a pileup on I-5 2 years ago. I know you've been working under the table as a graphic designer to pay rent on a studio apartment that is technically too small for 2 people. Rebecca stiffened. You checked up on me. I verify my investments, Ethan said, turning to face her. And I know that you're proud. Too proud to ask for help, which is a statistically poor survival strategy. It's not pride, Rebecca shot back, her voice gaining strength. It's safety. When Mom and Dad died, the system tried to split us up. They said I was too young. They wanted to put Maya in foster care in Tacoma and send me to a group home. I had to fight to prove I could take care of her. If I ask for help, if I show weakness, they take her away. That's the logic I live by. The room went silent. Ethan looked at Maya, who had stopped doing math and was looking anxiously between the 2 adults. Ethan felt a pang of guilt. He dealt in mergers and acquisitions, where splitting assets was a strategy. For Rebecca, splitting assets meant losing her sister. I won't let them take her, Ethan said. The promise slipped out before he could weigh the consequences. Rebecca looked at him, searching for the lie. You can't promise that. You're just a guy with a checkbook. You don't know how the system works. It's a grinder. It chews people like us up. I own the grinder, Ethan said softly. Or at least, I own the people who build it. He walked back to the chair and sat down, his posture less rigid than before. Rebecca, I need to ask you something. About your treatment. Before you relapsed. Rebecca's expression guarded instantly. What about it? 2 years ago. You were in remission. Then you switched medications. Do you remember the name of the drug? Rebecca frowned, thinking back. It was something generic. The insurance company sent a letter saying they wouldn't cover the brand name anymore. They said the new one was chemically identical. Immunex, I think? Or something like that. Ethan's hands clenched into fists on his knees. He forced them to relax. And did you notice anything different when you started taking it? I felt sick, she whispered. Not chemo sick. Different. I had fevers, rashes. My joints felt like they were on fire. The doctor said it was just my body reacting to the stress, or maybe a virus. But I knew. I told them something was wrong. They just upped the dose. She looked at Ethan, her eyes narrowing. Why are you asking me this? Is this about the bill? Is the insurance company fighting you? No, Ethan lied. I like to understand the variables. He couldn't tell her yet. He couldn't tell this dying girl that the man sitting in her room, the man she was starting to trust, was days away from handing $1 billion to the people who might have poisoned her. "Maya," Ethan said, changing the subject abruptly. "Show me the next problem. The train, leaving New York." As Maya scrambled to show him the paper, Ethan felt a weight settle in his chest that no amount of money could lift. He was walking a tightrope. On one side, his life's work. On the other, the truth. And in the middle, a little girl learning division and a teenager fighting for her life. He checked his watch. 9:02 p.m. He had to go back to the office. The files were waiting. "I have to go." Ethan stood up. "Work." Maya looked disappointed. "Will you come back tomorrow?" Ethan looked at Rebecca. She didn't say anything, but she didn't look away either. "Yes," Ethan said. "I'll bring dinner. Hospital food is inefficient for healing." As he walked out, he heard Maya whisper, "See? I told you he was nice." And Rebecca's reply, soft and skeptical, "We'll see, Maya. We'll see." The archive room of Cross-Stream Dynamics was digitally secure, but Ethan preferred physical copies when he was hunting. He had printed the entire Omnicorp due diligence file, 3,000 pages, and spread them across the mahogany conference table in his private office. It was 2:08 a.m. The city outside was asleep, a sea of black interrupted by the blinking red lights of airplanes and radio towers. Ethan had discarded his jacket. His sleeves were rolled up, his tie was on the floor. He looked less like a CEO and more like a detective working a cold case. "Coffee, sir?" Marcus asked, stepping into the room quietly. Marcus had stayed late, sensing the mood. "Black." "Double shot," Ethan muttered, not looking up. He was tracing the supply chain of Immunex. Omnicorp was clever. They didn't manufacture the contaminated batches themselves. They outsourced it to a subsidiary in Southeast Asia, a shell company called Vanguard Synthesis. On paper, Vanguard was an independent contractor. Legally, Omnicorp had plausible deniability. They could claim they were victims of a bad vendor. But Ethan knew how these structures worked. He followed the money. He found a series of internal memos labeled Cost Rationalization Strategy, Q3 2022. He scanned the dense text, his eyes darting back and forth. Then he found it. A single email chain, buried in the appendix of a subfolder. From J.P. Sterling, VP of Operations, Omnicorp, to Director of Vanguard Synthesis. Subject, RE, Stabilization Agent Purity Concerns. We are aware that the industrial-grade stabilizer carries a 0.05% higher risk of impurity compared to the pharmaceutical-grade option. However, the cost differential is significant, 40%. Given the projected volume of Immunex distribution, this saving amounts to $12 million per quarter. The risk falls within acceptable tolerance levels for this patient demographic. Proceed with the lower-grade synthesis. We will handle the regulatory paperwork. Ethan read the email 3 times. Acceptable tolerance levels. This patient demographic. They weren't talking about broken screens or slow software. They were talking about cancer patients. People with compromised immune systems. People like Rebecca. They had calculated that saving $12 million was worth the statistical probability of killing a few dozen people who were likely to die anyway. It was cold logic. It was his kind of logic, twisted into something monstrous. Ethan felt sick. He pushed the chair back and stood up, pacing the room. He had the smoking gun. This email proved that Omnicorp executives knowingly authorized the use of a dangerous chemical to cut costs. If he released this, the acquisition would implode. Omnicorp's stock would crash. Ethan's company, having already sunk millions into the preliminary merger costs, would take a massive hit. His reputation for perfect deals would be shattered. The board would be furious. Arthur Vance would try to oust him. But if he didn't release it, he closed his eyes and saw Maya's face. He saw Rebecca's shaking hands. The intercom buzzed, startling him. "Mr. Cross," the night security guard's voice crackled. "There is a gentleman here to see you. He says he knows you're upstairs." "It's 2 a.m., Johnson. Send him away." "He says his name is Arthur Vance, sir, and he has a key." Ethan froze. The chairman. A moment later, the heavy oak doors of his office swung open. Arthur Vance walked in, looking impeccably dressed even at this ungodly hour. He wore a camel hair coat and carried a silver-handled cane, though he walked perfectly fine without it. "Burning the midnight oil, Ethan?" Arthur smiled, his eyes scanning the sea of papers on the table. "Or perhaps burning bridges?" Ethan didn't flinch. He leaned against the table, crossing his arms. "Just doing my job, Arthur." "Due diligence." Arthur walked over to the table and picked up a sheet of paper. It wasn't the incriminating email. Ethan had instinctively covered that with a folder, but it was close. "The deal is done, Ethan," Arthur said, his voice smooth but heavy with threat. "The papers are drafted. The press release goes out Monday morning. Why are you digging into closed files?" "I found discrepancies," Ethan said calmly. "The Immunex lawsuits. They weren't just nuisance suits. There's a pattern." Arthur chuckled, a dry, rattling sound. "There are always patterns, my boy. That's the pharmaceutical business. You heal 1 million? You hurt 10? It's a numbers game. You, of all people, should understand that. You built an empire on algorithms. Algorithms don't have faces," Ethan said. "This does." Arthur's smile vanished. He stepped closer, the tip of his cane tapping softly on the carpet. "Let me be clear, Ethan. This acquisition is the cornerstone of our 5-year plan. If you sabotage this because you've suddenly grown a conscience over some sad story you stumbled upon, the board will remove you. We will strip you of your CEO title, your shares, and your legacy." Ethan stared him down. "Is that a threat?" "It's a prediction," Arthur said. "Like the weather." "You're a brilliant man, Ethan. Don't throw it all away for a burst of sentimentality. Delete the files. Sign the deal on Monday. Be the billionaire you were born to be." Arthur turned and walked to the door. He paused, his hand on the handle. "Oh, and Ethan, I heard about your charity case at the hospital. Very noble. But be careful. If the press finds out you're emotionally involved with a patient who was harmed by the company you're buying, they'll call it a conflict of interest. They'll say you're buying Omnicorp to bury the evidence. It would look very ugly." The door clicked shut. Ethan stood alone in the silence. The threat was clear. Arthur knew. He knew about Rebecca. And he was ready to use her as leverage. Ethan looked down at the email under the folder. Acceptable tolerance levels. He grabbed the paper and crumpled it in his fist. The next evening, the rain had stopped, leaving Seattle scrubbed clean and glistening under the streetlights. Ethan carried 2 large paper bags into the hospital room. The smell of grease, salt, and spices filled the sterile air. "Thai food," Ethan announced, placing the bags on the rolling tray table. Pad Thai, spring rolls, and something called crying tiger beef, which the man assured me is not made of actual tigers. Maya giggled, clapping her hands. "I love noodles." Rebecca was sitting up in the chair again, looking tired but alert. "You actually came back. I verify my variables." Ethan repeated his line, though a small smile cracked his stoic mask. And the variable hunger needed to be addressed. For the next hour, the hospital room transformed. It wasn't a place of sickness. It was just a room where 3 people were eating dinner. Ethan, clumsy with the plastic chopsticks, provided endless entertainment for Maya. He told them stories about his business trips, not the boring meetings, but the disasters. The time he got lost in Tokyo, The time he accidentally insulted a diplomat in France by ordering the wrong cheese. He watched them eat. He watched Rebecca laugh. A genuine, full-throated sound that made her look 5 years younger. He watched Maya shovel noodles into her mouth with the joy of a child who feels safe. For the first time in a decade, Ethan didn't think about stock prices. He didn't check his phone. He just existed. "So," Rebecca said, wiping her mouth with a napkin. "What's the catch, Ethan?" The mood shifted slightly. "What do you mean?" Ethan asked. "Rich guys don't just hang out in oncology wards for the ambiance," Rebecca said, her gaze steady. "You're getting something out of this. Is it guilt? Did you do something bad?" Ethan froze. She was sharper than he gave her credit for. I make difficult decisions every day," Ethan said carefully. "Sometimes, the numbers require me to hurt people's livelihoods to save a company. Maybe I am looking for balance." "Balance is a myth," Rebecca said. "There's just surviving and not surviving." She looked at Maya, who was drawing on the back of a placemat. "My dad used to say, 'Character is what you do when the lights are out.' When no one is watching." Ethan felt a chill. He thought of the email hidden in his safe. He thought of Arthur's threat. "Rebecca," Ethan started, his voice serious. What if you found out that the reason you got sick wasn't just bad luck? What if it was a mistake made by someone powerful?" Rebecca's eyes darkened. "I'd want them to pay. Not with money. I'd want them to look me in the eye and tell me why my life was worth less than their profit." She leaned forward, her voice fierce. "I'd want everyone to know what they did." Ethan nodded slowly. "I see." Just then, the door opened. A doctor walked in, Dr. Evans, the head oncologist. He looked grave. "Ms. Patterson," Dr. Evans said. "Mr. Cross, I have the results from this morning's blood work." Rebecca tensed. Maya stopped drawing. "Is it bad?" Rebecca asked. "It's unexpected," Dr. Evans said. "The chemo is working on the leukemia cells, but your liver enzymes are spiking, dangerously high. It seems your liver has been sensitized. It's struggling to process the toxins." Ethan stood up. "Sensitized by what?" "We're not sure," the doctor admitted. "Usually, we see this kind of damage from long-term exposure to certain industrial chemicals or bad reactions to previous medications." Ethan's heart hammered against his ribs. The stabilizer. The impurity. "What does this mean?" Rebecca asked, her voice trembling. "It means we have to pause the chemo," Dr. Evans said softly. "If we continue, your liver will fail. We need to flush your system." But what?" Ethan demanded. "But without the chemo, the leukemia will rebound. Rapidly." The room spun. The joy of the dinner evaporated. "So," Rebecca said, her voice hollow, "if I treat the cancer, my liver fails. If I save my liver, the cancer kills me." "It's a difficult bind," the doctor said. "We are looking into alternative filtration therapies, but they are experimental and expensive," Rebecca finished. "Money is not an issue," Ethan barked. "Do whatever you have to do." "It's not just money, Mr. Cross," the doctor said. "It's time. We need to know exactly what sensitized her liver so we can use the right antidote. Without knowing the specific toxin, we're guessing." Ethan looked at Rebecca. She looked defeated. The light had gone out of her eyes. He knew exactly what the toxin was. It was in the email. Polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons, a common impurity in cheap stabilizers. If he told the doctors, they could treat her specifically. They could save her liver, and then save her life. But if he told them, he would have to reveal how he knew. He would have to reveal the documents. He would have to blow the whistle on Omnicorp before the deal was signed. He would lose his company. He would be sued into oblivion. He would destroy everything he had built. But if he stayed silent, Rebecca would die. "I need some air," Ethan choked out. He turned and walked out of the room, Ignoring Maya's confused call of, "Ethan?" He marched down the hallway, bursting through the emergency exit doors into the stairwell. The concrete echo amplified his ragged breathing. He pulled his phone out. He had the photo of the email on it. He could send it to Dr. Evans right now. His finger hovered over the send button. Character is what you do when the lights are out. Ethan Cross stared at the screen, tears of frustration stinging his eyes. The algorithm had finally presented him with a problem he couldn't solve with a check. He had to choose. The billion-dollar empire, or the girl with the brown eyes. And time was running out. The stairwell was cold, a vertical tunnel of concrete and steel that smelled of dust and unfulfilled escape. Ethan Cross stood on the landing of the 4th floor, his phone glowing in his hand like a radioactive ember. Character is what you do when the lights are out. The words echoed in his mind, bouncing off the walls. For 10 years, Ethan had believed that character was a liability. Character didn't maximize shareholder value. Character didn't optimize supply chains. But looking at the screen, at the damning evidence of a corporation poisoning children to save $12 million, the logic of his life crumbled. If he stayed silent, he kept his billions. He kept his tower in the sky. He kept the illusion of perfection. But Rebecca would die. Maya would be alone, and he would be the man who let it happen. If he spoke, he lost it all. Ethan closed his eyes. He took a breath that shuddered in his lungs. Then he tapped the screen. But he didn't send the email to the press. Not yet. He dialed Dr. Evans directly. "Cross? It's late," the doctor answered, sounding exhausted. "Listen to me very carefully," Ethan said, his voice dropping to a register of absolute command. "The liver toxicity. It's not viral. It's chemical. We suspected that, but without knowing the agent, it's polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons," Ethan cut him off. "Specifically, a stabilizing agent used in low-grade industrial manufacturing. The breakdown creates a highly specific hepatotoxin that mimics autoimmune failure." There was a stunned silence on the other end. How could you possibly know that? That's an industrial contaminant. It wouldn't be in medical supplies. "Do not ask me how I know," Ethan snapped. "Just tell me, if you treat her for PAH poisoning, can you save her liver? If that's really what it is, yes. We can start aggressive chelation therapy immediately. We can bind the toxins and flush them out before the damage is permanent. But Ethan, I can't just administer that based on a hunch. It's a heavy protocol." "It's not a hunch," Ethan said, his voice cracking slightly. "I am betting my life on it. Start the treatment. I'll take full legal responsibility." "Okay," Evans said, sensing the gravity in the billionaire's voice. "I'm paging the pharmacy now." Ethan hung up. He leaned his forehead against the cold concrete wall. It was done. The medical part was done. Rebecca had a fighting chance now. But the clock had started. By giving the doctor the specific name of the toxin, he had left a breadcrumb. A smart investigator would eventually ask why Ethan Cross knew the chemical composition of a bad batch of drugs produced by the company he was acquiring. He had bought Rebecca time, but he had sold his own future to do it. He walked back into the hallway. Through the glass window of room 402, he saw nurses rushing in. He saw Dr. Evans giving orders. He saw Rebecca looking confused, then frightened, as they hooked up a new IV bag, a bag filled with a fluid that looked like dark amber. Maya was standing in the corner, clutching her teddy bear. Ethan slipped into the room and knelt beside her. "What's happening?" Maya whispered, her eyes wide with panic. "Is she—" "They're fixing it," Ethan said, putting a hand on her small shoulder. "I figured out the puzzle, Maya. They're giving her the medicine she needs." "The chocolate train arrived?" she asked, a callback to their math lesson. Ethan smiled, a sad, broken expression. "Yeah, The train arrived just in time. He looked at Rebecca. She was staring at him through the flurry of medical activity. Her eyes were heavy, lidded with sedation, but they were locked on his. She mouthed one word. "How?" Ethan didn't answer. He couldn't. He stood up, buttoning his jacket. He had one more thing to do. The hardest thing. "I have to go, Maya," he said. "I have a meeting." "In the middle of the night?" "The most important meeting of my life," Ethan said. "You stay here. You hold her hand. You be brave." He walked out of the hospital, into the night. He didn't call his driver. He walked. He needed the rain on his face. He needed to feel the city one last time as a king before he became a pauper. Monday morning arrived with the subtlety of a sledgehammer. The headquarters of Cross Stream Dynamics was buzzing. The press had gathered in the atrium, a sea of cameras and microphones. The acquisition of Omnicorp was the business story of the year. The stock market was poised to rally. In the executive boardroom, the mood was celebratory. Arthur Vance sat at the head of the table, sipping espresso. The Omnicorp executives were there, looking smug in their $5,000 suits. Ethan Cross entered the room at 8:59 a.m. exactly. He was dressed immaculately. His suit was navy blue, his tie a deep crimson. He looked every inch the titan of industry. But there was something different in his eyes. The cold, robotic detachment was gone. In its place was a burning, terrifying intensity. "Ethan!" Arthur stood up, arms wide. "The man of the hour. We were just discussing the post-merger integration. The press is waiting downstairs for the signature." Ethan walked to the front of the room. He didn't sit. He placed a single thick file folder on the mahogany table. The sound of it hitting the wood echoed like a gunshot. "There will be no signature," Ethan said. The room went dead silent. The smiles evaporated. "Excuse me?" The CEO of Omnicorp, a man named Sterling, scoffed. "If this is a last-minute negotiating tactic, Cross, it's in very poor taste." "It's not a negotiation," Ethan said. He looked at Arthur. "It's an execution." Arthur's eyes narrowed. He glanced at the folder, then back at Ethan. "Ethan, may I have a word with you? In private?" "No," Ethan said loudly. "We'll do this here, in front of everyone, in front of the minutes." Ethan opened the folder. He pulled out the email, the one about the acceptable tolerance levels. "Gentlemen," Ethan began, his voice steady, "I built this company on the principle of optimization. We fix inefficiencies. We remove errors." He held up the paper. "But there is a difference between an error and a crime." "Ethan, stop this immediately," Arthur hissed, stepping forward. "Security!" "Sit down, Arthur," Ethan roared. The command was so powerful, so filled with raw authority, that the chairman actually froze. Ethan turned to the Omnicorp executives. "This is an internal memo from your operations team dated 2 years ago. It authorizes the use of industrial-grade stabilizers in the production of Immunex. You saved $12 million, and in exchange, you poisoned thousands of immunocompromised patients, including children." Sterling's face went pale. That is proprietary information. You have no right." "I have every right," Ethan said. "Because I am the one you're asking to buy the gun you used to shoot them." He looked around the room. "I have sent copies of this file to the FDA, the SEC, and the Department of Justice. As we speak, my assistant is handing copies to the press in the lobby." Pandemonium erupted. Phones started ringing instantly. The Omnicorp executives jumped up, shouting legal threats. Arthur Vance walked up to Ethan, his face purple with rage. "Do you realize what you've done?" he whispered, spit flying. "You've torched the deal. You've crashed the stock. You've destroyed your own company, Ethan. You are finished. I will bury you." Ethan looked at the man who had been his mentor. He saw the greed, the fear, the emptiness. "You can try," Ethan said calmly. But you can't bury the truth. Not anymore. Ethan turned to the window. He could see the news vans outside scrambling. The ticker on the giant screen in the corner of the room flashed red. Omnicorp stock plummets amidst allegations. He had done it. He had pressed the button. Mr. Cross, the head of legal said, her voice shaking, you are in breach of your fiduciary duty to the shareholders. You are deliberately devaluing the company's assets. I am devaluing a lie, Ethan corrected. We have to suspend you, Arthur shouted over the noise. Effective immediately. You are removed as CEO. Get security in here. Get him out. 2 large security guards entered the room. They looked hesitant. They knew Ethan. They respected him. It's okay, boys, Ethan said, straightening his tie. I know the way out. He walked past the shouting executives, past the ringing phones, past the empire he had spent his entire adult life building. He didn't look back. As he stepped out of the elevator into the lobby, the flashbulbs blinded him. Reporters shouted his name. Mr. Cross, is it true? Did you leak the documents? Are you resigning? Ethan stopped at the podium that had been set up for the victory speech. He leaned into the microphone. The room went quiet, hungry for a soundbite. There is an old saying in business, Ethan said, his voice amplified across the hall, that the only thing that matters is the bottom line. He paused, thinking of a girl in a wheelchair and a little girl with a worksheet. They were wrong, Ethan said. The only thing that matters is who you are willing to save when it costs you everything. He stepped away from the mic and walked out the front doors. Security escorted him to the curb. They took his badge. They took his company phone. He stood on the sidewalk, the wind whipping his coat. He was unemployed. He was facing lawsuits that would likely bankrupt him. He was a pariah in the business world. He reached into his pocket and found his personal phone. He had one notification, a text from Dr. Evans. Her levels are stabilizing. The antidote is working. You did it. Ethan Cross, the man who had just lost $1 billion, threw his head back and laughed. It was a laugh of pure, unadulterated freedom. The next 3 days were a blur of lawyers, subpoenas, and isolation. Ethan's assets were frozen pending the SEC investigation. His penthouse was swarmed by paparazzi. He couldn't go home, so he stayed in a cheap motel on the outskirts of the city, paying cash. He watched the news on a grainy television. Omnicorp had declared bankruptcy. The FDA had issued a massive recall of Immunex. Class action lawsuits were forming by the hour. The scandal was global. And Ethan Cross was the villain and the hero, depending on which channel you watched. To Wall Street, he was a traitor who had sabotaged the market. To the public, he was the whistleblower who had exposed a monster. But Ethan didn't care about the pundits. He only cared about one thing. On Thursday evening, when the fervor had died down slightly, he put on a baseball cap and a nondescript jacket and took a taxi to Seattle Grace Hospital. He signed in as a visitor. The receptionist recognized him. Everyone recognized him now, but she didn't say a word. She just smiled and buzzed him through. The walk to the oncology ward felt longer than usual. His legs felt heavy. He wasn't the powerful CEO anymore. He was just a guy with no job and a lot of legal trouble. What would he say to her? He reached room 402. The door was open. Rebecca was sitting up in bed. She wasn't just sitting, she was eating yogurt. Her skin, which had been gray and translucent just days ago, had a faint, healthy pink hue. The dark circles under her eyes were fading. Maya was reading a book in the chair next to her. Ethan knocked softly on the doorframe. Maya looked up and screamed, "Ethan!" She bolted from the chair and slammed into him, hugging his waist. This time, Ethan didn't stiffen. He hugged her back, picking her up and spinning her around. "You came back," she squealed. "We saw you on TV. You were yelling at the bad guys." Ethan put her down and looked at Rebecca. Rebecca wasn't smiling. She was watching him with an intensity that made him want to look away. She pointed to the remote control. The TV in the corner was muted, showing a news segment with Ethan's face and the headline, "Billionaire loves everything to save patients." "You knew," Rebecca said softly. Ethan walked over to the bed. "I suspected." "No," Rebecca shook her head. "You knew. You knew exactly what poison was in me. That's why you told the doctors to use the collation thing." "I had access to the files," Ethan admitted. "And you leaked them," she continued. "You blew up your own deal. I watched the news, Ethan. They took your company. They took your money. You're broke." "I'm not broke," Ethan said, trying to make a joke. "I have a very nice watch I can sell." Rebecca didn't laugh. Tears welled up in her eyes. "Why? Why would you do that? You don't even know us. We're nobody. You were a king." Ethan pulled the plastic chair closer and sat down. He looked at his hands that had signed billion-dollar contracts, now empty. "I wasn't a king, Rebecca," Ethan said quietly. "I was a machine. I spent 10 years thinking that if I just accumulated enough money, enough power, I would be safe. I thought emotions were weaknesses." He looked at Maya, who was listening intently. "But then a little girl spilled juice on my suit." Ethan smiled. "And she showed me that the only real power in this world is the ability to help someone who can't help themselves. When I saw what they did to you, knowing I could stop it, but only if I gave up the money." He took a deep breath. "It wasn't a hard choice. It was the only logical one. $1 billion is just paper. Your life, that's something that can't be replaced." Rebecca reached out and took his hand. Her grip was weak, but warm. "You saved me," she whispered. "Twice." "And you saved me," Ethan replied. "You woke me up." "So, what do we do now?" Maya asked, climbing onto the foot of the bed. "Are you going to come live with us? Our apartment is small, but the couch is okay." Ethan laughed, a genuine sound that eased the tension. "I think I might need to find a new job first, Maya, but I would like to stay close, if that's okay with you." "You're family now," Rebecca said firmly. "And family sticks together." Ethan felt a lump in his throat. He had lost his empire. He had lost his status. But sitting in that hospital room, holding the hand of the girl he saved, he felt richer than he ever had in the boardroom. But the story wasn't over. The fallout was just beginning. And while the medical danger had passed, the real world, the world of rent and bills and legal fees, was waiting to crash down on them. Ethan Cross had to learn how to live as a normal man. And he was about to find out that restarting a life is much harder than building a company. The apartment in the Rainier Valley district was a far cry from the penthouse. It was a third-floor walk-up with peeling beige paint, a radiator that clanked like a dying engine, and a view of a laundromat. Ethan Cross sat at a wobbly IKEA table, staring at a laptop that was 3 years old, a loaner from his lawyer. It had been 6 months since the boardroom brawl. 6 months since the name Ethan Cross had gone from the cover of Forbes to the front page of every tabloid scandal sheet. The fallout had been nuclear. The SEC investigation had stripped him of his liquid assets to pay fines and settlements. Cross-Stream Dynamics had been dissolved, its assets sold off to pay creditors. Ethan had avoided prison thanks to federal whistleblower protection laws, but he was, by all standard definitions, ruined. His net worth, once measured in 10 figures, was now hovering around $2,000. He took a sip of instant coffee. It was bitter. He grimaced, missing the Ethiopian blend his personal barista used to make. "Complaining about the coffee again?" Ethan looked up. Rebecca was standing in the doorway of the small kitchen, leaning on a cane. She didn't strictly need the cane anymore. Her strength was returning daily, but she liked it for balance. Her hair was growing back, a soft fuzz of dark curls that framed a face no longer gaunt, but full of life. "I'm analyzing the chemical composition," Ethan joked dryly. "I believe it shares DNA with asphalt." Rebecca laughed, walking over and placing a grocery bag on the table. "Well, drink up. We have a big day. Maya's school play is at noon, and you promised to help build the cardboard castle." Ethan smiled, a genuine, unforced smile that reached his eyes. "I didn't promise to help. I promised to manage the construction. I'm a supervisor, Rebecca." "You're the guy with the glue gun," she teased. Life was different now, smaller, quieter, and infinitely more complex. Ethan had learned how to do laundry. He had learned that milk expires faster than he thought. He had learned that an evening spent watching a movie on a cracked iPad with two sisters was more fulfilling than a gala in Monaco. But the reality of their situation was still precarious. Ethan needed work. He had applied to dozens of firms, but he was radioactive. No board wanted a CEO who had blown up his own company. "Any news on the job front?" Rebecca asked, her tone softening as she started unpacking apples and bread. "2 rejections," Ethan said, closing the laptop. "They say I'm overqualified and a liability risk." "Their loss," Rebecca said firmly. "They don't know what you can do." "They know exactly what I can do," Ethan countered. "That's why they're scared." There was a knock at the door. Ethan frowned. "Are we expecting anyone?" "Maya invited a friend?" Rebecca shrugged. Ethan walked to the door and opened it. Standing in the hallway wasn't a school friend. It was Arthur Vance. The former chairman looked older, defeated. He wore a suit, but it looked rumpled. "Arthur," Ethan said, his voice cold, "I have nothing left for you to take. Unless you want a half-empty jar of instant coffee." "I'm not here to take, Ethan," Arthur said, his voice raspy. "I'm here to talk. I have nothing to say to you." Ethan moved to close the door. "Wait!" Arthur jammed his foot in the door. "Please, it's about the hospital." Ethan paused. He opened the door wider. "What about the hospital?" Arthur sighed, stepping into the small, cramped apartment. He looked around with a sneer of distaste, but quickly hid it. "Omnicorp is dead," Arthur said. "The lawsuits bled them dry. But the settlement fund, it's finally being distributed. The court appointed a trustee to manage the payouts to the victims." Ethan crossed his arms. "Good. Rebecca should get what she deserves." "She will." Arthur nodded. But the court also needed someone to oversee the restructuring of the logistics for the victim relief supply chain. Someone to ensure the medical supplies actually get to the people who were hurt, instead of being lost in bureaucracy. Arthur looked Ethan in the eye. "The judge asked for you." Ethan blinked. "Me?" "You're the only one who knows the system inside out," Arthur admitted grudgingly. "And you're the only one the victims trust. They don't trust the suits. They trust the guy who blew the whistle." "I'm unhireable," Ethan said. "Not for this," Arthur said. "It's a court-appointed position. It doesn't pay CEO money, Ethan. It pays a civil servant's salary. It's grinding work. But it's yours if you want it." Ethan looked back at the kitchen. Rebecca was listening, holding an apple halfway to her mouth. She nodded, a fierce look of encouragement in her eyes. Ethan turned back to Arthur. "I don't do it for you, Arthur." "I know," Arthur said, looking down. "You do it for the variables." "No," Ethan corrected him. "I do it for the people." He extended his hand. "I'll take the job, but on one condition." "Name it." "You retire," Ethan said. "Permanently. Go play golf. Get out of the way. The future belongs to people who actually care about it." Arthur looked shocked, then resigned. He shook Ethan's hand. "Done." As Arthur left, Ethan closed the door and leaned against it. He wasn't a billionaire. He was a civil servant. He would be managing logistics for a relief fund. "So," Rebecca said, biting into the apple, "you got a job." "I got a job," Ethan exhaled. "Does this mean we can afford better coffee?" "Maybe," Ethan laughed. "Maybe." Just then, the bedroom door burst open. Maya ran out, wearing a cardboard crown and a cape made from a bedsheet. "Ethan! Rebecca!" she shouted. "The castle! We have to build the castle! The dragon is coming!" Ethan pushed off the door. He walked over to the little girl who had started it all, the variable that had broken his algorithm and saved his soul. "Don't worry, Your Highness," Ethan said, bowing low. "I know how to handle dragons." 1 year later, the sun was setting over Cary Park, casting a golden glow over the Seattle skyline. The Space Needle stood tall against the backdrop of Mount Rainier. On a picnic blanket spread out on the grass, a strange family unit was finishing a meal of pizza and sparkling juice. Rebecca, now 18 and fully in remission, was sketching the skyline in a sketchbook. She was starting art school in the fall. Her hair was a thick, dark bob, and her cheeks were flushed with health. Maya, now 9 and missing a front tooth, was trying to do a cartwheel on the grass, failing and laughing hysterically. And Ethan Cross sat watching them. He wasn't wearing a $3,000 suit. He was wearing jeans and a wool sweater. He looked younger than he had a year ago. The lines of stress around his eyes had softened. He checked his phone. An email from the Relief Fund. Logistics efficiency up 40%. All victims have received full compensation packages. He smiled and put the phone away. A tourist couple walked by, pausing near the blanket. The man looked at Ethan, squinting. "Excuse me," the tourist said. Didn't you used to be Ethan Cross, the billionaire?" Ethan looked up. He looked at his worn-out sneakers. He looked at the simple pizza box. Then he looked at Rebecca, who was laughing at Maya's cartwheel. He looked at Maya, who ran over and collapsed into his lap, hugging him tight. "I am Ethan Cross," he answered the tourist. "Wow," the man said, looking at Ethan's modest clothes with a mix of pity and confusion. "You lost it all, huh? That must be tough." Ethan looked at the tourist. Then he looked down at Maya, who was whispering, "You're the best night ever, Ethan." Ethan looked back at the man and smiled. A smile of absolute, unshakable contentment. "No," Ethan said softly. "I didn't lose anything. I traded it." "Traded it?" the tourist asked. "For what?" Ethan gestured to the two girls. "For everything that actually matters." The tourist looked confused, nodded awkwardly, and walked away. Ethan wrapped his arm around Maya. Rebecca leaned over and rested her head on his shoulder. "You okay?" Rebecca asked. "Never better," Ethan said. "Ready to go home?" "Yeah," Maya said, yawning. "Let's go home." They packed up the blanket. They walked down the hill together, not as a billionaire and his charity cases, but as a family. Ethan Cross had built an empire on numbers. He had lost it on a choice. But as he walked through the twilight, listening to Maya tell a joke about a penguin, he realized the final, most important calculation of his life. Being rich isn't about what you have in the bank. It's about what you have when the bank is empty. And by that measure, Ethan Cross was the wealthiest man in the world.